All right. Just for the record, I consider this a standing ovation. So thank you very much. Please be seated. Healthy leaders. Healthy isn't just the absence of disease or pain. It's a sense of well-being. If that's the definition of a healthy leader, how are you doing? And the truth is, it's a pretty wild ride for a lot of us a lot of the time. Ministry is a full-contact sport, and it is not without pain. And how many have already been in ministry long enough to have figured that out? And if you haven't, I have bad news for you. It's just going to get tough. It was more than 25 years ago, and my wife and I had taken our kids out for a day trip, and they'd fallen asleep in the back of the car. They were just little at the time, and they'd fallen asleep in the back of the car, and my wife looked over and said to me while I was driving, "Is this a good time to talk?" See? That's code. And guys, if you don't know it, I'm telling you now. That's code. And I said yes. And then she began to tell me some things that she had observed about me. And what she had observed is that whenever there was anything that offered resistance in my life, I would withdraw from whatever challenge that was. I developed an approach of passivity to almost all things in my life. And she said, "I don't have any ideas on how to fix this. I don't know what to tell you about that. But you need to work on it because it's important for our relationship. It's important as a father. It's important as a minister." And so that rest of that ride home was pretty quiet. And I was just thinking. And I asked God for an opportunity to have a conversation with a small group of pastors to see if I could talk some of this out and work some of this through. And I did have that opportunity. With one couple, we literally stayed up sitting out on a park bench until 2 o'clock in the morning. And what I can tell you is that I actually said things out loud for the first time in my life. I had thought them and I had felt them, but I'd never said them. And what I can also tell you is nothing got fixed that night. There wasn't one original new idea. But I can't explain. The burden felt lighter. It just felt better. And so I went from there to a conference that my wife had signed me up for, and it was for leaders. There was over 4,500 leaders in a room for this conference. And the very first person to get up and speak talked about how that as a leader, if you don't have the courage to pull the trigger, then give the gun to somebody else and go sit down. Now, I just told you, right? My problem was passivity. I'm just thinking, who is this guy? And the next guy gets up and he starts talking about what is possible if you will give yourself fully and completely to the work of the ministry. And so then they took a break, and the guy sitting next to me, I didn't get up and go. I didn't feel like I had the strength to get up and go. And the guy sitting next to me looks at me and he introduces himself. And he said, "I'm from China. I live here in the United States right now." He said, "My wife and 2 children are in the lobby. God has been speaking to my heart for some time that we are to leave the United States and go back to China and start a church. And if it fails, we will starve because there is no support for this. And I'm going to go tell her now that that's what we're going to do." And I thought to myself, what is this place? I got heart palpitations just sitting here and I haven't done anything yet. And then the third guy gets up. And the third guy says, "You've heard what the first guy said, and you've heard what the second guy said, and now I'm going to tell you why when you get home you won't do any of it." And for the next 45 minutes, he dissected my life in front of thousands of people. And he exposed me in ways I couldn't possibly have imagined. And so I went home and I started a journey that took me over 2 years to completely deconstruct my life and reconstruct it towards health. It is the most significant thing I have ever done for myself, for our family, or for any organization I have ever been involved in leading. Just a few years ago, at one of our network conferences, we were having a panel discussion, and one of the pastors began to disclose how even though he led a significant and prevailing church in his city, that he had lost his will to thrive and even his desire to survive, and would just hope some way that his life would come to an end because he couldn't take it anymore. I remember the stunned silence in the room because of all the respect that we had for this guy. And then another guy who was on the same panel said he was going through the exact same thing. And here's the thing. They were both close friends, and neither one of them had ever talked to the other about it. See, health really matters. We need to figure this out. Peter Scazzaro, in his book on emotionally healthy spirituality, identifies the top 10 symptoms of unhealthy leadership. So ready, brace yourself. If anybody gets all 10, just stand and cheer. Because, okay? Number 1, using God to avoid dealing with difficult and challenging areas in life. 2, ignoring the emotions of anger, sadness, and fear, or even treating them as sin. 3, dying to the wrong things. We're supposed to die to the sinful nature, but a lot of us have given up on hopes and dreams and joy, and we think that's the cross that Christ has called us to bear, and it's a lie of the enemy. It's not true. Denying the past's impact on your present. You are living out a programming whether you realize it or not. And just because you don't see it doesn't mean other people don't see it. Ask your spouse, they'll tell you. Dividing your life into secular and sacred compartments. Doing for God over being with God. Spiritualizing away conflict. It's just the devil. No, there might be some important information in there. You never know. Covering over brokenness, weakness, and failure. Living without boundaries. We don't know when to say yes or how to say no. Judging other people's spiritual journey. A lot of us hear voices in our head, and they're voices like this. I am a mistake. I am a burden. I am stupid. I am worthless. I am not allowed to make mistakes. I must be approved by certain people to feel okay. I don't have the right to experience joy and pleasure. I don't have the right to assert myself and say what I think and feel. I don't have the right to feel. I am valued based on what I do rather than who I am. And would you please hear me if you hear those voices? God never talks to anybody that way. Never. There are other people who have said those things, but they were not speaking for God, and they are not God, and we should not make a God out of them. That's not his voice. So a spiritually healthy leader has come to understand some different things. My value has been established by what God did for me, not what I have done for him. He thought you were worth the spilled blood of his one and only Son. He bankrupted heaven so that you could be with him forever. That should tell you something about your value and your worth. A healthy leader realizes that you have a right and an obligation to assert your God-given power in the world. Our world needs your voice. Our world needs your efforts. You are entitled to exist. It is good that you exist. You have been created to be distinct and unique. Stop trying to impersonate other people. We don't need echoes. We need voices in our generation. Right now, we need fresh voices in our generation. You have value, and you should be paid attention to. You have the right to experience joy and pleasure, and you have the right to not be perfect. Just get good at apologizing. I'm an expert at apologizing. If you get good enough at apologizing, you can become an executive officer in the New York Ministry Network. That's true. That's true. Healthy leaders, you're wondering, I know, you're worried. I've been going 10 minutes and I haven't got to the first point. Welcome to Calvary Assembly in Rochester. It happens every Sunday. Healthy leaders know what their abilities are. That's what healthy leaders do. They have abilities. They have abilities, and they know what they are. You have to be healthy in your ability. And where do our abilities come from? The first thing we need to know is spiritual gifts. 1 Peter says that each one of us should use whatever gift we have received to faithfully serve others as stewards of the manifold grace of God. That's what we're supposed to do, spiritual gifts. So how can we discern and discover what our spiritual gifts are? Well, that's sometimes a little bit tricky. Growing up in the environment I grew up in, our understanding of spiritual gifts was limited to 1 Corinthians 12. And I didn't even realize that there were spiritual gifts listed in Romans 12 or in Ephesians 4. And for the record, I don't even think those three places are an exhaustive list of spiritual gifts. And so we're taught something in our culture, and our culture tells us is that you can be anything you want to be. If you just try hard enough, it's a lie. You can't be anything you want to be. I can never be a player in the NBA. It isn't going to happen. I'm no good with a basketball. Practice has not improved my performance. I have tried hard to dunk. I have never even touched the bottom of the net. This is not going to happen. You cannot be anything you want to be, but you can be what God created you to be. That's what's true. So now we need to figure out what it is that God has created us to be. So how do we do that? Well, part of it includes, once we begin to discover those gifts, some equipping and some training. And what I have to say is a lot of our training is theological, right? And certainly our understanding of spiritual gifts should be theologically based. But Ephesians 4 indicates that there are apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers that have been given by Christ to equip and train us to be able to do the work of the ministry. So our primary focus on how spiritual gifts works tends to be in church gathering settings. Like we've all seen how that works. But how do spiritual gifts work in the marketplace? How do they work in a church council? I can tell you as a pastor, I need spiritual gifts to be at work on church council. And by the way, if I feel God has told me something, I never start the conversation with, God told me. That is a bad way to start a conversation. What about one-on-one assignments? I'm going to tell you a story now that is going to annoy some people and might put my credentials in jeopardy. So, if you're going to complain to national office, please spell my last name correctly. K-I-R-K. That's not true. So I got a call from a lady in our church. She attends, her mother was in the hospital. Her mother was having her last birthday. She was in hospice. Had only a few days left to live. And her mother had come to faith in Christ and wanted to be baptized. And there's no opportunity for immersion in that hospital. And so they said, can you come and do a baptism in her room? And I said, I will come. But I had no idea what to do. I've never done a sprinkling baptism. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, so I did what my son would do. I went on YouTube and searched sprinkling baptism. I'm not making this up. I don't have to make anything up in my life. It's that crazy. And the only thing I could find was a video of this guy who is hurling water at a woman who's elderly and in a wheelchair, and it looks more like an exorcism than it does a water baptism. She's actually recoiling. I felt bad for her. I could just almost hear him say, "The power of Christ compels you." I just wasn't, what is that? I didn't know. And so I said, well, I'm not doing that. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm not doing that. And so what am I supposed to use? I don't even know. So I went home and I got a bowl. If there's going to be water, you got to have a bowl, right? So I got a bowl, and I drove to the hospital. And I walked in the room, and it was packed. Family, nurses, doctors, chief surgeons, hospital administrators. I've never seen so many people in a hospital room. And at least half of them have no faith in Christ at all. They're unchurched and dechurched, and they're there because they love this woman. And it's her birthday, and she's being baptized. And so I just walked in the room. Now, in case you don't know, as a Pentecostal minister, you are allowed to walk in with confidence even when you have none. It's just, right? It's what we do, right? No, it's true. I tell God, I tell him, look, I know I'm not the best option you have, but I'm the only option you have in this room right now. And it's in your best interest to use me, because otherwise nothing's going to happen. The person who's better at this didn't show up. I'm just saying. So I walked in. I couldn't believe all the people, and I handed the bowl to the daughter. I said, would you please get some water? Which probably broke the whole mystical holy water thing. She went into the little bathroom and God gave it to me just like that. And I asked the daughter, I said, would you please pull the sheets off of your mother's feet? And she pulled the sheets off her mother's feet, and I took some water, and it was kind of like I was squeezing an orange, I guess is how I would say I did it. I just took the water and I sprinkled water and I said, I baptize you in the name of the Father, who guides and directs your steps and leads your paths in all the places you will go. And I took water and I did the same thing on her hand, and I said, I baptize you in the name of the Son, who holds you in the palm of his hand, and he will never let you go. And then I took water and I did the same on her head, and I said, I baptize you in the name of the Holy Spirit, who grants unto you this day the assurance of your salvation, and you are forever his. And the daughter said, I've never seen a baptism like that. And I said, I haven't either. I just don't know how that happened. Training. We need training. And training simply requires that you start with humility, and humility makes 3 assumptions. Number 1, I could be wrong. Can we all say that together? I could be wrong. Some of you couldn't say it. And it's not because you're right, it's because you're proud, and there's a difference. Here's the second aspect of humility. I could be better. Let's try that. I could be better. And we can be. And the third is, I don't know how. We need other people to help us. We will not rise to the challenge. We will fall to the level of our training. And we need to be trained. The stuff we do is serious. So we've talked about vision and values, and if we don't have a structure and a strategy to help us with this, it's not really going to accomplish much. So there's things that we're going to retool, like Network Conference. It's still going to be Network Conference, but we're going to shape some things to be more strategic and intentional, and leadership summits like you've been attending this year, and we've got one coming soon in 2 other summits coming this year in October and November, and local church training. Like Pastor Bill, he goes and does this amazing local church training, but the only people who benefit from it are the people who are right there. Wouldn't it be great if we could make that available to anyone at any time? That'd be so fantastic. And then there's things we can add like podcasts and blogs and cohorts. There's so much to do. So that's health in your ability. The second thing is health in your stability. 1 Corinthians 15 says, stand firm in your faith and let nothing move you. This isn't about being entrenched. It's about being balanced. That nothing throws you off. Ephesians 4 puts it this way. It says, don't be infants any longer, being tossed back and forth by waves and by winds and by people's private agendas or hidden agendas. That there's the stability that needs to come. You see, we can have a sense of our spiritual gifts and we can be trained for them, but if we lack stability, we will waste our opportunities and abort the fruit that God intends for us. Gifted people can blow a lot of stuff up. They make the headlines. And stability is not a spiritual gift. Stability is a result of maturity, and you can't force maturity. If you're a parent, you know you've tried, right? You look at your kids and say, just grow up. Some of you have tried that on your spouse. It didn't work with them either. We can't force maturity, but we can create environments where maturity can occur. And Ephesians 4 tells us what that environment is, a place where we can speak the truth in love. We need truth and we need love. They're not mutually exclusive things. So if we're going to have stability, we need some boundaries. And we have to have healthy boundaries in our personal life. Dr. James Bradford, who was our general secretary and has now gone to be the lead pastor of Central Assembly in Springfield, he was giving a devotional, and I was there to hear it, and he talked about the necessity of self-care, and he said self-care is not selfish. And I'm sure somebody had said that around me before, but I never paid attention to it before. You have to know what drains you, and then you have to know what refreshes and re-energizes you. And you know what was true? I was well into my 50s, and I didn't know the answer to that question. I didn't know what re-energized me. One of the truths about me is that I like ministry. I enjoy almost everything I do in ministry. I'm not saying there aren't some days that are harder than others, but I enjoy a lot of it. And so when I think about doing it, I get excited and I get energized. But when I do it, I get tired. Does anybody else get tired after doing ministry? Okay, just a half a dozen of you. So I made some interesting discoveries. The things that I get excited about doing actually tire me. And the things that replenish me, I don't get excited about doing. My wife would start asking me questions, so what are those things that replenish you? I didn't know. So I've started experimenting. Let's try some things, figure some stuff out. And this is a really big deal. Because if we don't know what fills us back up, you will drain yourself to empty. And it won't look good when you get there. Without boundaries in our lives and without boundaries in our churches, all the wrong people will exercise all the control. We need boundaries. Have you ever seen parents in a restaurant or a public space who have little children, and the little children are just running like little demoniacs? And they're screaming, and they're just tearing up the whole place. Has anybody seen that? I'm not asking if it's your child, but you have seen it. You've seen it. And the parents just have kind of a sheepish look on their face, like it hasn't dawned on them. They're the parent. Like, you're the one that God has rightly delegated authority to do something about this. And I shouldn't tell you this story either, but I will, because I'm in that mode today. So we were on vacation, and there was this parent who decided to discipline their child in basically just screaming, shaming ways in the middle of the street. In the middle of the street. Tons of people all around. And I started to take out my phone, and my wife said, don't. Because she knew what I was going to do. What I was going to do is go over and ask the parent, say, excuse me, but I actually teach parenting classes. And I was just wondering if I could video this exchange. As an example of what you should never do. Don't do that. And my wife, who was wiser than I am, said, don't do that, so I didn't do that. But you've seen these little, legions running around, causing all kinds of, and what you should know is the parents really are embarrassed, and they have forgotten that they are the ones who are in authority. and they will take their children home. They will not discipline them, but they will carry a resentment about that because that child embarrassed them in public. And then little Johnny will create some little work of art, and he'll come to show them. And you know what the parent will do? The parent will almost completely ignore that because they're still resentful. And now the child is receiving negative reinforcement for doing something good. That is a bad strategy. And we do this in our churches. There are people who embarrass us. They annoy us. They frustrate us. And we don't feel like we can deal with it. And so we sit around with sheepish looks, but when they finally get something right, we can't reinforce it because we carry some resentment. That's a problem. That's a problem. We can't show any appreciation or support. We had 2 people in our church that like to give prophetic words, and I use that word loosely. One was just the cliche guy. I don't know if you've ever had one of these guys. We get all the strange ones in our church. He's a cliche guy. It was a recital of all of his favorite verses and phrases that he had ever heard in his life. And this would go on for several moments. And it felt like it was his goal to make sure that he said something that would encourage at least every person in the room. And if there was an authentic word in there, it was so diffused by the time he was done, nobody knew what it was. And then we had another person who would give prophetic words, and she was the corrector. You ever seen one of those? There was always some issue that God had had enough of, and she was going to tell us what that was. And this is true. So one Sunday, one of these words are occurring, and I was just watching the congregation. Now, I know some of you might think, well, Pastor, your eyes are supposed to be closed. And no. I don't close my eyes in that stuff. Well, what if somebody sees you with their eyes open? How would they know? I've never had one person come up to me and say, Pastor, I saw your eyes were open. Because they know that they're outing themselves right there. And what I saw surprised me. What I saw was people with their eyes rolling and their arms folded and frustrated looks on their faces. And this is what God spoke to my heart. He said, the people of this church family despise prophecy, and it's your fault. I go, well, that's a problem. So I decided, right, we have to have clear boundaries. So I went to the first person, and I gave him an assignment. And the assignment was, I want you to go through, and I want you to copy every single prophetic word given in the entire New Testament and bring it to me. And he said, that could take a while. I said, you'll be surprised. And so he went and made a copy. He used computer cut and paste. He didn't write it out by hand. And he brought it to me. And I said, do you notice anything? And he said, no. I said, well, I do. First of all of them are short. You can't find a prophecy in the New Testament that goes past 3 verses. And I said, so why do you think that is? He said, I don't know. I said, maybe they're being laser focused so that the word of God accomplishes what it's supposed to do, instead of being so diluted and diffused that nobody knows what God was saying in that moment. I said, so here's the thing. If you have a word from God, I want it to be laser focused. And if it's more than 3 verses, then just sit down. And then I went to the second person, the corrector. See? You know, this doesn't go well, does it? And so I went to her and I said, I'd like you to listen to something. She said, what's that? I said, it's you. I recorded your prophecies. And I played them back to her. And I said, do you notice anything? And she didn't. And I said, well, I noticed something. You sound angry. And she says, well, God is very upset. And I said, you know, we should always be concerned when we think that God's emotions and our emotions are the same emotions. And in my experience, I have found that God is not nearly as upset as we are. It's just, and so I told her, I said, according to the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians 14, a prophetic word is to encourage, it is to strengthen, and it is to comfort. The word correction does not exist in that phrase. And so if you are to give another prophetic word, it can only strengthen, it can only encourage, it can only comfort, and you may not correct anybody anymore. The responsibility of correction belongs to the spiritual leadership of the church, which Paul said to Timothy must be done with great patience and careful instruction. So I relieve you of any responsibility to correct anyone in this church anymore. I was showing great patience and careful instruction right then because that's what I was doing. I was correcting. Can you please hear me? We need clear boundaries. We need clear boundaries. So if I don't do that, then I'm becoming an enabler, enabling unhealthy people to act in unhealthy ways. And you need accountability. First of all, personal accountability. Unaccountable people do inexplicable things. We need accountable lives. I had a friend in ministry, and he had no clear boundaries. And I went to him, and I asked him, I asked this question. I said, do you have any idea how many guardrails I've hit with my car in all the years I've been driving? And he said, no, I don't. I said, none. I've never hit a guardrail. I've been driving more years than you are old. I've never hit a guardrail. But if I'd ever gone out of control, it probably would have saved my life. And what I want you to know is you have no guardrails in your life. And if you ever lose control, the crash is going to be spectacular. You need some guidelines. You need some guardrails. We need these boundaries in our life. There's another aspect to accountability that we really struggle with, and it's how we hold other people accountable. Because if you've been in ministry for longer than 6 months, there has been somebody who failed to meet an expectation that you thought was clearly communicated. And when we don't address those issues, we frustrate other members of the team or parts of the church who are deeply committed workers and leaders. When other people don't fulfill their responsibilities, everybody else has to pick up the slack, and eventually they just get tired of doing it. And there's two basic reasons that people fail to meet those expectations, and the one is competency. They just don't have the ability to do it. They don't have the skills. And so that can be an opportunity for training or for equipping. And sometimes the person just doesn't have the capacity. They're never going to be able to do it. And so in my experience, when you let a person off the hook, when they don't have that ability, and you let them off the hook, they're relieved. So you know what? I'm not going to ask you to do that anymore. I know that's hard and it's draining to you, so we're going to let you off the hook on that. And they consider that a blessing. So the first reason people don't meet the expectation is competency, but the second is attitudinal. And that's another thing. If you've been in ministry for more than 6 months, you've seen people with attitudes. They won't accept responsibility and they won't submit to authority. And attitude issues will poison the atmosphere of a church. It'll weaken the commitment of otherwise loyal people. So I've had a little strategy that I've developed over the years on how to approach this. I go to individuals and I ask, were you aware questions? Were you aware? And see if they were aware of something that happened. And when they're not, I explain what happened and ask them if they can understand how we got there. Here's an interesting observation that I've had. People with competency issues often present as though they have attitudinal issues because they're embarrassed about what they can't do. And so they act like they've got attitude, and they really don't. And people with attitudinal issues often present as though they just don't know how to do it, and you keep trying to train them and equip them and train them and equip them and train them and equip them, and you can train them until Jesus comes, and they're never going to get it because they're not going to get it. So here's the thing. It doesn't matter how able we are if we're not stable. Even God can't build a great church on a faulty foundation. So we have to be able to be healthy in our abilities, healthy in our stability, and then just healthy in our availability. if we're too busy to have time for ministry as it should be, and family, and for friends, then we're going to get into a lot of trouble quickly. I listened to a trained Christian psychologist, and he says the number one indicator for moral failure is a person who has no friends. And this is what he said. It's terrifying. If you have no friends and you are in ministry, it's not a matter of if you will have a moral failure. It's a matter of when you will have a moral failure. So how do you find friends? Well, don't go ask people to be your friend. That never works well. You don't like it when they do that to you, so don't do that to them. And don't unnecessarily eliminate people because they don't improve your status. You know, some people, we just think, well, it's not going to benefit me. No. You don't know what a person can invest into your life. And don't pretend to be somebody that you're not. So how can you develop friendships? Try doing something you enjoy with people who also enjoy doing those things. All right? Anybody who knows Bill knows he loves to golf. Said no one ever. So he loves to hunt and he loves to fish. And so he gets together with other hunters and fishers, and they go out and they hunt and they fish and they enjoy each other's company and they have a camaraderie. They enjoy doing that. Now this is please listen to this. It is more important to find someone that enjoys doing what you do than to find someone who always agrees with you. That's not necessarily a friend. That's just a reflection. So be available. Be transparent. You can't develop close friends if you hide your heart. And then network. Network is not just an office in Syracuse. It's about getting together and sharing what we're learning through our successes and our failures. It's about cross-pollinating ideas and discovering new strategies and trying some new structures to see what we can accomplish together. Last night we had a rehearsal for ordination here, and I stayed after to talk with some of our pastors and presbyters. And one pastor had to deal with a sudden reduction of revenue in their church as a result of 2 key families relocating out of state. And what he shared was graduate level information on how to approach a challenge like that. That information that he shared was so helpful. If you're ever in a situation like that, just what he focused on and the options he considered and the counsel he sought. And the church is moving forward with stability and with confidence in spite of that significant loss. Those kinds of conversations happen when we network together. That's what God is calling us to do. So yes, there's going to be some changes in how we use our time together, and there's going to be some resources that are available, but the goal is always the same. It's so that we can be the healthy leader that God has called us and created us to be.